Bien, bonsoir à toutes, à tous les participants. I don't know if Rabbi Jacobson understands French or not. I hope no. Then I could say אומרים מקצת שברו של אדם שלא בפניו. That means even though he's here, if he doesn't understand, so that means he's not בפנינו. So I could say whatever I want, it's okay. So I thank you to Rabbi Jacobson that he accepted to be with us tonight, malgré toutes ses occupations. Et je voudrais, on m'a demandé de l'introduire, je ne pense pas qu'il ait besoin d'une grande introduction. Baruch Hashem, Shmo holech lefanav. This you understand, Rabbi Jacobson, it's okay. Et donc, Baruch Hashem, il est mondialement connu, il est là pour toutes les institutions. Mais je voudrais vous raconter une petite... je suis resté avec une question, et j'ai encore la question jusqu'à maintenant. Rav Jacobson, avant qu'il était déjà un conférencier vraiment hors pair, mais il enseignait également à la yeshiva à Crown Heights, et un de mes enfants a été son élève à la yeshiva. Et on l'avait fait venir dans cette année-là, cette même année où mon fils était dans son shiur à la yeshiva. On l'avait fait venir à Montréal pour la convention de Neshech Chabad, où il y avait au-delà de 500, 600 femmes qui étaient là. Et il était bien sûr le principal orateur. Et là, dans les couloirs, on a discuté. Et il m'a dit, bon, là maintenant que j'ai terminé le travail de faire mes conférences, je vais retourner au vrai travail qui est celui de la yeshiva et qui est celui d'enseigner aux talmidim et de former les talmidim. Bon, après quelque temps, il a quitté. Et là, je me pose la question, je suis sûr que pour lui, c'est ça le vrai travail, c'est de continuer à enseigner à travers toutes ces conférences et vraiment faire un travail extraordinaire. Et on le remercie. So thank you very much, Rabbi Jacobson, that you took the time to be with us tonight. Et je vais juste donner un petit aperçu de notre organisme Matane, Basseter, Bessimha. Je peux dire avec toute habilité que j'étais à la source quand c'était encore à l'état embryonnaire. Et tout a commencé avec une personne qui nous était très chère et qui était Alegria Hassan Zichrona Livracha Simha. Son nom Alegria en espagnol, c'est la traduction, c'est Simha. Et qui, dès que je suis arrivé ici à Montréal, il y a déjà bientôt 34 ans, donc il y a eu tout de suite un lien très intéressant qui s'est formé avec la famille. Et elle m'avait demandé de donner un shiur chez elle de Harambam. Donc, pour celles qui se rappellent, il y avait une fois par semaine un shiur de Harambam que j'ai donné aux dames. Entre-temps, elle est tombée malade, mais elle n'a pas voulu qu'on arrête le shiur. Le shiur a continué chez elle à la maison. Et de sa chambre, de son lit, elle suivait le shiur. Jusqu'au moment, malheureusement, elle nous a quittés. Mais elle m'avait dit, il faut qu'on fasse quelque chose pour la communauté. Il y avait bien sûr chez Tibadel Haïm Tovim Shalom, il y avait Nina qui était impliquée, Nina Stanfield, encore d'autres personnes. Et c'est là qu'a débuté cet organisme extraordinaire qui est Matane, Basseter, Bessimha. Et comme son nom lui-même l'indique, Matane, Basseter, Bessimha, Bessimha, comme ça nous ramène aussi que c'est fait à la mémoire de Simha Hassan Zichrona al-Veracha. Mais surtout, le Matane, on donne, Basseter qui est très important discrètement, et on le fait Bessimha, et on le fait avec beaucoup de joie. Dans le Shulchan Aruch, c'est rapporté dans Yoredea Siman Resh Nun, là-bas c'est rapporté la mitzvah de Achnasat Kala, la mitzvah de que Yaton ou Ani, lorsqu'un enfant, lo alenu, n'a pas un des parents, ou alors il est ani, les parents sont aniim, sont pauvres, c'est comme s'ils sont inexistants et qu'ils ne sont pas capables de marier leurs enfants, alors c'est rapporté clairement que Messi'in lo, ça c'est le lachon du Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch nous dit Messi'in lo, c'est-à-dire il y a des gens qui sont responsables de marier ces jeunes. Vesochrim lo bait, et c'est écrit clairement, il faut lui louer une maison. Matzi'im lo mita, uchlet hashmisho, il faut préparer des lits, il faut préparer tout ce qui vient avec. Ve'achar Messi'in lo isha, et après on l'aide pour se marier. Et c'est rapporté dans Shulchan Aruch. Il n'y a pas une zakat aussi importante, aussi grande que cette mitzvah de Achnasat Kala, de permettre à des jeunes de se marier. Plus que ça, le Shulchan Aruch lui-même, toujours dans le même contexte, il dit que ça rentre en priorité dans une communauté. Et toute communauté doit ce qu'on appelle les Gaba'et Tzedaka. Les personnes qui sont responsables de ramasser la tzedaka doivent prioriser la mitzvah de Achnasat Kala. Et ça, c'est très intéressant. Je ne vais pas rentrer dans tous les détails, mais le point, c'est qu'ils doivent prioriser. Et on va aller même plus que ça. C'est écrit dans le Siman Resh Nun Zayin que s'il n'y a plus d'argent dans la coupa, dans la caisse de tzedaka, les responsables sont obligés d'aller emprunter de l'argent. D'aller emprunter de l'argent pour pouvoir faire la mitzvah de Achnasat Kala et ensuite ils auront la responsabilité de rendre cet argent, de rembourser cet argent. Et s'il y a trop de monde, alors bon, ils doivent s'arranger comment gérer, etc. Et c'est pour ça que vraiment, Matane, Basseter, Bessimha, je peux vous dire personnellement que c'est un organisme extraordinaire où chaque sou qui est ramassé va directement et redistribué directement. Il n'y a pas de frais d'administration. Il n'y a absolument aucun frais, aucun frais. Toutes les personnes qui sont impliquées sont entièrement bénévoles. Et je ne voudrais pas citer des noms parce que je ne voudrais pas commettre d'impair en oubliant certaines personnes, mais je peux dire que toutes les personnes qui travaillent pour Achnasat Kala, qui ont travaillé pour Achnasat Kala, elles ont toutes des histoires extraordinaires à vous raconter et la récompense et le grand sachar qu'elles ont reçu de ce côté-là et la grande simha que ça leur donne de cet accomplissement. Donc, sans plus tarder, on va passer la parole à notre invité ce soir. Et encore une fois, c'est vraiment un honneur, c'est un plaisir de l'avoir parmi nous. Et bien sûr, comme on dit, im en kesef en Torah, en kemach en Torah. Donc, on ne peut pas faire les mitzvot de cette tzedaka s'il n'y a pas de donation, si les gens ne participent pas. Alors, tous les ans, dans les années précédentes, il y avait des thés qui se faisaient dans les quartiers différents de la ville. Et vraiment, les dames, toutes les dames donnaient vraiment de cœur. Elles donnaient, malheureusement, déjà depuis c'est la deuxième année, on n'est pas c'est impossible de faire ça. Mais Baruch Hashem, aujourd'hui, il y a d'autres moyens. Et donc, bien sûr, l'idée, c'est avant tout d'écouter des livrets Torah et d'écouter le Rav Jacobson qui va sûrement nous dire des choses extraordinaires comme d'habitude. Mais surtout, le but, c'est de s'assurer que la coupa soit pleine, que la caisse soit pleine et qu'on n'arrive pas à la situation, comme dit le Shulchan Aruch, que s'il n'y a pas d'argent, alors les responsables sont obligés d'aller emprunter de l'argent. On ne veut pas arriver à ça. C'est sûr que tout le monde va être très, très, très généreux et généreuse et donner vraiment Yad Rehava et surtout Bessimha, surtout avec joie. Parce qu'en vérité, quand on sait, et je vous donne un petit exemple de rien du tout et je terminerai avec cela. Combien de fois on m'a posé la question, on m'a dit, vous savez, il y a une Kala qui va se marier, les parents sont démunis, les parents de la Kala, mais les parents du Hatan ont beaucoup de moyens. Alors, est-ce qu'on devrait vraiment aider la Kala? Est-ce qu'on doit l'aider? Peut-être on devrait s'adresser aux parents du Hatan, et pour eux, c'est rien du tout. Ma réponse est, il n'en est pas question. Il faut que cette Kala rentre avec toute sa dignité dans cette famille, et sa dignité, c'est-à-dire de venir d'amener ce qu'elle doit amener avec elle. Donc, on a l'obligation de l'aider. Ce n'est pas parce que l'autre côté, ils ont les moyens que nous, on ne doit pas aider cette Kala. Au contraire, c'est celle-là qu'on doit aider. Et il faut l'aider selon les moyens, selon les attentes. Alors, plus on aura et plus on donnera Bezrat Hashem. Et je peux vous dire que des fois, les listes sont longues et qu'il y a des, je ne dirais pas des listes d'attente, parce qu'Achnasat Kala fait de tout pour ne laisser personne partir sans rien du tout. Ce n'est pas grand-chose ce qu'on donne. Ce qu'on ne donne pas, ce n'est pas nous qui donnons, c'est vous qui donnez. Ce n'est pas grand-chose, mais on espère qu'on pourra donner encore un peu plus et que tout le monde vraiment mettra la main dans la poche et participera à cette grande mitzvah. Et ça fait partie des mitzvot. She'en lahem shi'ur. C'est des mitzvot qui n'ont pas de limite. Comme dit la Mishnah, Elu dvarim she'en lahem shi'ur. Et parmi ces choses-là, c'est mitzvat achnasat kala. Alors, Bezrat Hashem, que ce soit be'atzlaha. And again, we thank you, Rabbi Jacobson, for being here tonight with us. And I give you the floor now, the chavod. Yeah, it's you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Kvod Harav Banon Shlita. Just somebody tell me that you could see me and hear me.
Yes, we see, we hear, yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for your words. Most of your words I didn't understand, but I saw the passion. So thank you for your words, and thank you for your kind words about myself, that which I heard and most of which I did not hear. And I want to thank really everybody who's gracing us here with your presence this evening for this extraordinary organization dedicated to Achnasat Kala, to build Jewish families, to help brides begin their life on the right foot with support, with all of their needs met, financial and physical and psychological and emotional and spiritual. So it's really a privilege, it's a schut to be able to be part of such an organization of Matane, Basseter, Bessimha, to be able to give generously and benevolently with simcha, with a sense of fulfillment and purpose and joy. It's especially appropriate this week when the Jewish people feel so united and so vulnerable, when all of us are feeling each other's pain. And I know that Montreal has two families sitting Shiva for loved ones, the Gestetner family and the Steinmetz family for their loved ones who have been killed, who have been crushed on Mag Ba'omer Tovshin Pei Aleph in the holy place of Miron. At the time that's called Hilula. Hilula means a wedding. Hilula means an anniversary. And the yard site of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, the great Talmudic sage Rabbi Shimon, the son of Yochai, is called Hilula. He called it a day of celebration, a day of joy. And they came to celebrate, they came to dance as 45 precious souls were taken. And now we're here. It's a week of grief. It's a week of Shiva. It's also a powerful week of unity, a week of commitment, a week of tears, but also a week of powerful faith and unwavering resilience and fortitude that we are learning from the parents, from children, from spouses, from siblings of these extraordinary souls. So to be able to unite with all of you this week, tonight, to connect more to our obligation and our joy to give tzedakah, to give charity, especially to build Jewish families, to continue Jewish families, to marry off brides and grooms and help them begin their homes, is for me a great privilege. And I want to thank all of you for gracing us here this evening. And I want to thank the whole community of Montreal and everyone who's joining us here. And I especially want to thank all the distinguished and esteemed directors and organizers of the event. You know, my dearest friends, we're going to take questions at the end. So I'm going to speak, and then afterwards we're going to open up the floor to questions. So you could feel free to ask whatever you would like, and God willing, we'll try to address it to the best of our ability, b'li neder. The topic that was allotted to me this evening is women and marriage. And it's really a wonderful topic. It's always appropriate, and it's always important and vital. And the reason it's so important and vital is because, to put it frankly, life is tough. Every life comes with its set of joys and challenges, trials and tribulations. Every life has its ups and downs, and every marriage, almost every marriage, has different situations and has to deal with different hurdles and turbulence and roadblocks that we have to overcome and confront and deal with. Life is hard. Life is difficult. And the moment you can acknowledge that life is difficult, it's not so difficult. In other words, the moment we can acknowledge that life is filled with hardships and we appreciate that, then we can actually know what to expect and have a good time. We can have fun. But we have to acknowledge the fact that life is hard. Because when I don't acknowledge the fact that life is hard and it gets hard, I get frustrated with reality. I get resentful. I get angry at the world. I get angry at people. I get angry at myself. I get angry at my husband, at my wife, at my kids. I get angry at everybody. But when I can acknowledge that life is hard, that the soul came down to the world in order to bring light into the world and make it a little bit of a better place, but that the soul itself was good. The soul came down to fix things, to repair the world, to mend society, to bring it to a place where it was not there before. In other words, the purpose of life is, as King Solomon says, Adam la'amal yulad. A person was born to toil. And the Talmud says in Tractate Sanhedrin 99, I think it is, there's three types of toil: amal melacha, amal sikha, and amal Torah. Rabbi Lazar explains. There's the toil of work, there's the toil of conversation, and there's the toil of Torah. And a person was created la'amal, for toil. When I can really acknowledge that, when I can embrace it, when I can recognize it, it can actually become exciting, fun, exhilarating, because I know this is what it is. This is what it's about. I can expect it. And it becomes part of my hobbies. It becomes part of my journey. Instead of running from it and instead of being frustrated, I can look forward to it, because I know, imagine you're going on a hike. I remember I was once going on a hike, and somebody tells you, it's an easy hike. Don't worry. It's short. It's easy. No toil, no effort. You're good. And then suddenly, in the middle of the hike, it's steep cliffs, dangerous rocks. You're out of breath. You're going up a slope further and further. It is strenuous. It requires so much prowess and toil and exertion. And you get very upset and dejected, and you feel angry, and you're upset at the person who took you here. But what happens if in the beginning of the hike, your guy turns to you and says, Sarala, Rivkala, Chayala, Rachala, whatever the name is, we're going on an incredibly difficult and challenging hike. It's arduous. It's not an easy hike. But you know what? You are going to be so proud of yourself, because I know that you can do it. And I'm going to be here to help you along the way. And I have done it many times, so I can guarantee success. And I have enough water for when you become thirsty, so don't worry. You'll be hydrated. Don't worry about it. And if you need any help, I'm here to help you. And I want to tell you, mobilize yourself, galvanize your power, bring your kochot, all your faculties in. You'll be present, and it's going to be an incredibly exhilarating experience, physically and psychologically. Now, if you decide to go, you get it. With every slope, with every step you have to take, and every breath you have to take, and every effort you have to make, you're almost looking forward to it, because this is what it's about. So that's why the Torah tells us a person was created to toil. Don't come down to the world and think life is just sitting on my couch and drinking milkshake. Of course, once in a while, you should sit down on your couch and drink a milkshake. But essentially, life has meaning, life has purpose. And for me to achieve that purpose, I need to give it all I got. I need to try hard. I need to suck the marrow out of life and maximize my potentials and utilize my potentials and utilize my faculties. Every day that passes is meaningful. And when a person realizes this, and every person in their own way encounters their difficulties and their challenges, and the Torah says these are not difficulties and challenges, these are really opportunities. These are not obstacles, but these are the opportunities that God has put in your way in order for you to achieve the purpose for which you were created. Then it can be fun. Then it can be a great hike. And sometimes the harder parts of the hike are even more exciting, more fun, because you know, here is the challenge and you were made for this and you're ready for this and you can do it, and you have a great tour guide directing you and navigating the road for you. And the same is true in all aspects of life. And one of the chief ingredients, one of the most important factors that allows us to confront life with a sense of equilibrium and balance is when we have a strong marriage, when there is peace in the home. Some time ago, I met a woman, and her husband is suffering from ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. May God grant him a complete and speedy recovery. They live not far from me, here in Muncie, in Rockland County, New York. And he listens a lot to my classes. The only muscle that works is his eyes. And with the technology of the computer, he looks at the computer and he could turn pages and he could study. And this Jew is a holy man. He studies literally all day. A few years ago, he made a second Siyum Hashas. He finished the whole Talmud, and they made a beautiful celebration that I had the privilege of attending. Incredible, incredible couple and a beautiful family. And once when I was visiting, I noticed the dedication that this woman has to her husband. And remember, this is a selfless dedication, day in and day out. And even though there's nurses, and even though there's help, but ultimately, the woman, the wife, was really bearing all the responsibility. And I saw she did it with so much, I don't know, like serenity and ease. And we were having a conversation. And I said, I want to ask you an honest question. Could I? And she said, yeah. And I said, I'm wondering about something. It looks like you enjoy being there for your husband, and it's so difficult because the person can't do anything. He has ALS. And you're a young woman. This happened to him when he was young. A young man, a young woman, raising a family of young children at the time. It's been already quite a few years, almost a decade. And I said, deep down, do you resent it? And do you resent him? I know it's not his fault. I know you don't blame him for his illness, but you're human. Do you ever like wake up in the morning and like, I'm done with this. I can't deal with this anymore. And you really resent it. And you can, and I understand it because it doesn't look like it. And I'm just wondering what's going on inside of you. And she looked at me and she said, Rabbi, why? Never. I said, why not? You're an angel. You're a human being. Maybe you're an angel. She said, because the way he treated me all the years till he fell ill, we had such an amazing marriage. He filled up my soul. He filled up my voids. He filled up my life with so much caring and so much joy and so much love that I really don't resent it. I find it to be a privilege. And tears came to my eyes. It was so moving to hear this from a woman with such a challenge. And it taught me such a profound lesson. Life has challenges. And one of the greatest assets to be able to confront them with serenity and tranquility is when a couple is united. As the Medrash says, Im Shalom Khan, this week's Parsha. Im Shalom Khan, Hakal Khan. If there is peace, there's everything. And when there's no peace in the home, there's absolute chaos. Because we can't predict what life brings. There's challenges in finances, there's challenges in health. There's, God forbid, loss and grief. There's challenges with children. And so many other obstacles that we encounter inside of us and outside of us, mentally, physically, financially, emotionally, spiritually. But when a husband and a wife are on one team, they may have different personalities, as I'll soon discuss, but they're unified, they're integrated, they're fused together. They're working in real unison with respect and harmony, even if they disagree. But there is a profound connection and commitment and trust and loyalty between them. Then that unity could contain whatever comes their way. The famous Rabbi Akiva, the great Rabbi Akiva, the Talmud says in Tractate Yevamis, that one day Rabbi Gamliel came to the synagogue and he was grieving because he saw Rabbi Akiva in a boat. He was coming to the port and he saw Rabbi Akiva in a boat. And the boat sunk. And he cried for the life of Rabbi Akiva that was lost. And then later, who showed up in the yeshiva? Rabbi Akiva. And he said, Akiva, what are you doing here? And Rabbi Akiva told him that yes, the boat sank. But I encountered a daf is daman li biyam. I encountered a board, a plank of wood from the boat. I encountered in the sea, in the ocean. And I held on to it. And it allowed me to float. B'chol gal v'gal, and every wave that came towards me, ninati lo b'roshi, I bowed my head to the wave. I greeted the wave like you say, Shalom Aleichem. How are you? I bowed down. I bent down my head. I swayed and bowed my head to the wave. I welcomed it. I didn't fight the wave. I went under the wave and the wave came over me until I made it to the shores and I was saved. And there's a lot of messages in this story. But one of them is those who are great surfers know you don't fight the waves. You don't fight the water. You have to synchronize your dance with the ebb and flow of the waves. You have to create a sense of camaraderie between you and the waves. You don't fight the waves. You agree to them. You have to go with the rhythm. Life has a lot of waves that come on us. And marriage itself can sometimes be a challenging situation, different people, different agreements. Rabbi Akiva, who was the paradigm of a good marriage, his wife is the one who built him up and turned him into what he was. She's the one who turned him from Akiva into Rabbi Akiva, the greatest transmitter of the Torah tradition in all of Jewish history. The Talmud says all the Torah tradition that we have today comes from Rabbi Akiva. And he told 24,000 students when he came back home, Shaliva Shalachem Shalom. What is mine and what is yours all belongs to her. Rabbi Akiva is the one who says in Talmud Shabbos, the definition of a wealthy person is somebody who has Kol Misha Yeshlo Ishan Ma'ebe Ma'asim, somebody who has a great wife. That's the definition of wealth. Rabbi Akiva understood this. And when somebody has that ability, so then the waves of life that come, instead of being in combat together, they can wave and they can bow their heads and allow the wave to come over them. But for this, you need a unified front. You need a fortified unit between a husband and a wife. Because when we're together, there's a fortress in the house. We could contain whatever comes. And we could contain it with peace and serenity. But when they themselves don't like each other and don't trust each other, and they're divided and fragmented, and they insult each other and they don't respect each other, and there's no real communication and no real connection, then what happens is the pressures of life tear them apart even more and destroy them and create such they wreak havoc in the family and in the home. So it's so important to be able to cultivate powerful relationships. And of course, you need to usually you need you and of course, ideally, you want the goodwill of both sides. Husbands and wives who are both working on themselves and on each other to enhance their marriage. There's a fascinating Jewish law. Maimonides writes, the Rambam writes, that when the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, on the holiest day of the year, would perform the holiest service in the holiest place, in the Holy of Holies in the temple. So you have the holiest person in the holiest place on the holiest day. There was a condition, the Torah says, that the high priest had to be married. If he was not married, the service of Yom Kippur, at least according to many opinions, was not kosher, was disqualified. Why? Why is that so important? He's in the Holy of Holies. Why does he have to be married? Who cares if he's a bachelor? And the answer, of course, is because it's the marriage that anchors him. It's the marriage that allows him to bring down the deepest holiness onto earth. Because a woman and a husband, my wife and a husband, a man and a woman, who have a good marriage, the woman creates a home. She takes a house and she turns it into a home. The Talmud says a person who doesn't have a home is not considered a full Adam. Your full potential in this world is not realized, even if you're a great person. So the high priest at the peak of holiness needs to have a wife, a spouse, who anchors him, who grounds him, who allows him to channel the deepest energies of divine holiness into the real world, because he has a home that his wife created for him and for her together, for both of them together. Maimonides writes, based on the Mishnah, that when the day of Yom Kippur is over and the whole service is finished and it's dark, the high priest takes off his golden, beautiful priestly garments and he puts on his regular garments and he goes home. And the commentators ask, why is that included in Jewish law? Obviously, he goes home. The work is over. Night has arrived. He got to go to sleep at some point. Where should the Kohen Gadol, where should the high priest go after Yom Kippur? He should go bowling. He should go to the pizza shop. Where should he go, to a basketball game? Where should he go? Of course he goes home. Where should he go, hang out in somewhere in Jerusalem? He goes home. But no, Jewish law specifies that and it's brought in Rambam and Maimonides, which is a book of Jewish law, as though it's a law. Why is it a law? And I once heard from my teacher, he said something exceptional. He said, because the ultimate objective of Yom Kippur is that afterwards you got to go home. It's not just a nice thing. Yom Kippur is over, you go home. That's the sign that it was a real Yom Kippur, when the high priest can take it all home. Because if he can't take it home, if it just stays in the sanctuary, then it's not real. It's not something that endures, that lasts. It doesn't have a foundation, an anchor here on earth. Some people, they fly away into the Holy of Holies. They have moments of exhilaration and inspiration and spiritual ecstasy and great religion. But on the holiest day of the year, Jewish law says to the high priest, you got to go home. And only if you go home, if you bring all the holiness into the house, if you integrate heaven and earth, do we know that you were really in the Holy of Holies. Because if you were really in the Holy of Holies, you have the ability to fuse heaven and earth, to fuse the spiritual and the physical, the metaphysical and the material, the soul and the body, to take all the holiness of the temple, of the Bet HaMikdash, and of the Kodesh HaKodashim, the Holy of Holies, and bring it back home into the family, into the relationship. So that's a little taste of the value that Judaism confers on a home, on the institution of marriage, on the power of the unit between a wife and a husband, which is why it's so important and so vital for each and every one of us in our own way to invest in it. The question, of course, becomes, but how? How do we make a good marriage? What's the role of the woman in marriage? What's the role of the man in marriage? I know now we're speaking to women. What is my role? What is my purpose? What is my function? How do I do it? And it's here that I would like to make a few points, a few very powerful points that I think can be helpful and relevant, and I hope also practical in people's lives. The first thing that's important to remember about marriage, and this is important for women and it's important for men, it's important for both genders, is to remember a great teaching of one of the great spiritual masters of Judaism, Rabbi Shnei Zalman of Liadi. And it's based on a teaching of Rabbi Isaac Luria, the Arizal. And the teaching basically says that the relationship of a marriage is inherently an unstable relationship, because a wife and a husband are usually opposite beings. They have different types of souls. They have different types of brains. They have different types of characteristics. They have different types of dispositions. And even if you have similar personalities and you get along well, and you dated a long time and you know each other well and you really appreciate each other, but there's still so many differences between you and so many things that really are not just different from each other, but opposite from each other. Shnei hafachim. Rabbi Shnei Zalman, the Balatanya, says one is fire and one is water. I'll let you guys figure out which one is fire, which one is water. Maybe it depends on the marriage. But usually one is more fire, one is more water. And fire and water don't easily coexist. So inherently, this is a relationship that is not stable. And what that means is that if you leave it alone, if you leave it to its own devices on its own, it tends to drift away. A husband and a wife, if they're not continuously working on their marriage, besides some exceptional cases, tend to drift away further and further and further, because the relationship inherently is not a stable one, because you're dealing with two opposites that have to come together. And whenever you're bringing together two opposites, you have to continuously recreate it again and again and again. And if you do not, the natural tendency, if you leave it to the status quo, the natural tendency is that they're going to drift away more and more from each other and grow distant from each other. The famous great genius and sage, known as the Rogatchover Gaon, Rabbi Yosef Rosen, he said something very interesting. He argues that from the perspective of Jewish law, nisuyin, marriage, is something that we don't do once. We may have our chuppah once, but halachically it's called pe'ula nimshechet. In the imagination of Jewish law, it's as though it's happening every moment. In other words, the chuppah that was created once, in which the couple got married, physically it happened only once. But from a legalistic perspective, Judaism looks at it as though it's happening, it's continuously happening every single moment. And it has interesting ramifications. Usually before we do a mitzvah, we make a blessing. And the blessing you do before you do the mitzvah. For example, if I'm lighting Hanukkah candles, I make the blessing before I light the Hanukkah candles. There is the exception. There are a few exceptions. But generally speaking, we do a mitzvah. I'm eating matzah. I make the blessing on matzah before I eat the matzah. And afterwards, I can't make the blessing anymore because I already ate the matzah. And yet Maimonides writes that even after the marriage, you could still do Sheva brachot. You could still make blessings, even afterwards. Why? So the Rogatchover says, because it's always happening again and again and again. So every moment is after the marriage, but it's also before the marriage, because the marriage has to be renewed again and again. What does this mean practically? It means that the fact that I told my wife last night, I love you, or the fact that you told your husband last night, I love you, is beautiful. But it's not enough to sustain and invigorate the marriage and give it fire for a day, for a week, for a month, for a year. No, tomorrow we have to work again on creating the relationship. Just like a candle that's burning. The fact that I put in oil yesterday is not enough to make sure that the fire is burning today. And the fact that I watered the plant 2 weeks ago will not guarantee that the plant is going to survive this week. I have to continuously irrigate it. I have to continuously replenish the flame with more oil in order that it should burn. So if you leave a couple to their own devices without continuously investing in the relationship, they will naturally tend to drift away. And slowly they get further and further and further from each other. And this is something that many couples don't understand, because we are often affected by novels that we read or by films that we see or by some impressions that we get from other people. You meet somebody, you fall in love, and forever you're always in love. And then people wonder, what happened? 10 years ago when we got married, 20 years ago when we got married, 30 years ago we got married, 5 years ago we got married, there was so much passion and fire. And now we feel so distant, we feel alienated from each other. What happened? And the first thing you have to realize is that a marriage has to constantly be rekindled and re-inspired. Both the husband and the wife need to put in the work to reconnect to each other and build that loyalty and trust. The fact that I trusted you yesterday is not enough for today. And the fact that you trusted me yesterday is not enough for today. And because it's inherently unstable, therefore, every time a couple communicates, they either have an opportunity to bring themselves closer to each other or to distance themselves from each other. Every single time there is communication between a husband and a wife, there is some type of connection or some type of encounter. It's not just, okay, we met each other. No, it's important, because either it's going to bring you closer if you put in the work of connection, or if not, it's going to pull you away from each other. So for example, if I'm sitting in the kitchen and I'm reading a newspaper, right, like men do, and I'm drinking my coffee and I'm reading the newspaper, and my wife comes into the kitchen and she looks out the window and she sees a beautiful, stunning, colorful bird. And she turns to me and she says, why? Yosef Yitzchak, my name. Yosef Yitzchak, that's my name. Look at this beautiful, beautiful bird. It's amazing. It's stunning, right? Here's my choice. Either I can be like some men that I know and I grunt. I'm busy with the newspaper. I'll look at it afterwards. And I just blew it. I had an opportunity to create a closer connection. I blew it. Or I can lift up my head, even if I'm not in the mood, because I'm enjoying the article. I can lift up my head and connect. I can show empathy. I can look at the bird and enjoy it, even if just because my wife enjoys it. And when we learn to think like this, the marriage can actually become magical. When we say, no, I don't need this. I trust my wife, she trusts me, we're married, it's been good. And sometimes people make this mistake. They don't realize that, no, even halachically, a marriage has to be recreated every single moment, because it's two opposites. And on their own, they tend to drift away. I once spoke to a very successful marriage therapist about this. And I asked him, how often do they have to connect? How often do they have to show affection to each other? And he told me, ideally every 3 hours. Every 3 hours, there has to be some positive communication where they feel the trust and the loyalty and the love that flows between them. I said, come on, but that's so unrealistic. People are busy, people are at work. He says, I know. But the rule is that after 3 hours, we start drifting away from each other. However, the drifting is very, very tiny. So that night when you come home, you can make up for all the hours that were lost and you can come back together. But if it's 3 hours and another 3 hours and another 3 hours and another day and another day and another day that you did not invest in creating that loyalty and making both parties feel that I can trust you 1,000%, they drift away further and further. And after a few weeks or after a few months, it's hard. It's hard to bring them back together. And this is such an important idea, because when we realize how vulnerable a marriage is, when we realize how vulnerable we are, how needy we are in a marriage. Yes, I need to be assured that you're here for me. And a guy once told me, nah, I don't have to do it. My wife is a confident person. My wife is a confident person, or my husband is a confident person. I don't have to do it. And I said, I hope so, but you may be making a mistake. It's not because you're suffering from a lack of confidence. Maybe sometimes people are suffering from a lack of confidence. It's because the relationship is so powerful and the level of loyalty that's necessary is so deep, because a husband and a wife are like one. How do two people that are opposites become one? You have to prove to me that you're one with me, that you want to be one with me. And I have to prove to you that I want to be one with you, not because I don't believe you, and not because you're a bad person, not because the guy is insecure, not because the woman is insecure. That may also be true, but simply because what's expected of this relationship is so powerful, it's so profound, and it's contrary to the fact that we're opposites. And therefore, you have to constantly combat that natural notion of drifting apart from each other. And people who do this and do this all the time know the results, and the results are blessings. The results are incredible. Which brings us to another point. And this has to do with the fact that two opposites, when they connect, they don't have to obliterate their differences. I once saw a t-shirt, and the t-shirt read, I'm very easy to get along with once you learn to worship me. But that's not the Jewish approach. Because the idea here is not to obliterate the differences between people. The idea is to bring together two separate people. The miracle of marriage is that 1 + 1 equals 1, but not by eliminating the 1 and the 1, but by creating a synthesis between 1 and 1, which is number 3, which is why God marries the Jewish people in the 3rd month, not in the 1st month, the month of Sivan, because it's about synthesizing the two to become something greater and deeper through a larger, transcendent reality that confuse the two opposites together. I once saw a fascinating and very moving story. There's a book about therapy. I think it's called The Way of the Therapist. I forgot the title, by Irving Yalom. Irving Yalom is a man probably today in his 90s, and he's one of the gurus of therapy. He lives in California. And in one of the chapters there, he tells a very moving story. I read it many years ago, so I'm not sure I'm going to get all the details correct, but the thrust of the story we got right. He tells an amazing, incredible story about a woman who came to him. And she was very distraught. She was very distressed. What happened? She had a difficult relationship with her father. Her father, she felt, was uptight and very disagreeable and stubborn. And whatever she said, he had to say opposite of her. And then she was getting married. And she decided that she wants to reconcile with her father. And she offered him to go on a road trip with her. It's near San Francisco in California. And they go on this road trip. And he's driving. And she's sitting in the passenger seat. And they come to some road, and she looks out her window and she sees a beautiful landscape. And she says, Daddy, look outside your window. The landscape is so beautiful. And he looks out his window and he says, beautiful? This is a stinky cesspool. It's a sewage system. It's disgusting. And she understands him to be once again disagreeable. She said one thing, he had to disagree with her. And she lifted up both of the hands in despair, like, I'll never get anywhere with this guy. And the road trip ended in disaster. She said, let's not do it. Let's go home. And the relationship was strained since. She just couldn't get over the fact that even at her wedding, a weekend before her wedding, he still had to be so stubborn. Years and years went by, decades went by, and she was driving with her husband. And one day they came onto that road. Imagine. But there was a little difference. She was driving and her husband was in the passenger seat. And they're driving on the same road. And you know how you go back to the same place where you were once and something happened? And you can feel everything that happened because you could still feel the knots in your stomach. And you could still feel the lump in your throat. And you could still smell and hear the noises that you heard then 30 years ago. You know what I'm talking about? It was one of those moments. She comes onto that road, and as Yogi Berra would say, it's deja vu all over again. And her husband looks out his window and he says, honey, look at the beautiful landscape. And she looks out her window, and you know what she sees? She sees a cesspool. Imagine. And she realizes her father was not disagreeing with her. Her father was not arguing with her. He was not trying to be argumentative and confrontational and impossible. He was just describing to her what he was seeing, because from his window, he saw a different reality. Out of his window, you saw a cesspool. Out of the other window, you saw a beautiful terrain. And she comes to Irving Yalom, to the therapist, and she's crying that she never made up with her father. And now she could not because he's dead. She was so heartbroken. She was so devastated. It's such a powerful story because it teaches us so much about marriage. You and your husband may be driving in the same car, but you're often looking out of two different windows. And that's not a bad thing. It's just a fact of life. What you see, he may not see. You may want to convince him and try to convince him the guy doesn't see it. And what he sees, you may not see. And the objective of marriage is not to break one of the windows and to get both of you into one seat looking out of the same window. No. Truth in marriage is not objective. Truth in marriage is subjective. The objective, the goal is for each one to be able to understand that the other person may be looking through a different window. And I could respect the window that you're looking through. I can create space for it, even if it's not my window, even if I don't see it that way, but I can create space for it. I can respect it. I can cultivate space in my mind for your perspective. Sometimes we'll be looking out of the same window and we'll see exactly the same thing, and that's wonderful, but not necessarily. And that does not make the marriage bad or toxic or negative, as long as we can laugh about it and embrace the fact that we're looking at two different windows. There's an amazing Mishnah in the Ethics of the Fathers, Pirkei Avot. Kol machloket she l'shem shamayim sofa lehitkayem. Machloket she'ena l'shem shamayim sofa lehitkayem. A fight for the sake of heaven will endure. A fight that's not for the sake of heaven will not endure. What does that mean? Why? I would say it's the other way around. A fight for God won't endure, and a fight not for God, not for the sake of heaven, will endure. But there's a very profound message here, at least one of the messages here. And you'll understand it in marriage. One of the differences between a good marriage and a bad marriage is, in a bad marriage, arguments don't continue because one couple stonewalls the other couple and the argument is dead. In a good marriage, the arguments could continue throughout their entire life with respect. You know, I saw an amazing statistic, and that is, even in the best of marriages, 70% of the arguments that the couple had in the beginning of the marriage, they're going to have 50, 60 years down the line. People naturally think that in a good marriage, there's no arguments or very few arguments. And in a bad marriage, there are frequent arguments, but that's not the case. Researchers have shown that even in the best marriages, there can be many arguments and the same amount of arguments that exist in bad marriages. The difference is not in the quantity or quality of arguments. The difference is how they deal with the argument. In a bad marriage, we argue and we assume that the other person is arguing with me because they don't like me, because you hate me, so you have to disagree with me. And my goal in life is to prove you wrong and to show you that you are foolish and you're petty and you're stupid. And sometimes I feel that I have to prove to the other person that they're idiotic and moronic. And therefore, when you'll agree with me, you'll become normal. And then at some point when you don't agree with me, we just stonewall each other and we ignore each other and we drift away and you pick up your hands like this, like there's nothing to do and that's it. And there's a lot of resentment. But in a good marriage, when they're 97, when he's 97 and she's 93, they're still arguing about the same things that they argued during Sheva Brachas. Should the light stay on or should the light go off? Is the window open? Is the window off? Where do we go for Shabbos? Where do we go for Pesach? What type of restaurant do we go to? smaller arguments, they're still arguing about the same things. But they could continue to argue because there is respect. I don't attribute the argument to negativity, to a lack of loyalty, to a lack of trust. I attribute it to the fact that you're looking through a different window. And when there is that loyalty and that trust, we can talk about it and we can bring both perspectives into our consciousness. And therefore, we could connect in such a deep way. Which brings us to another very important idea, that in a good marriage versus a bad marriage, the nature of conversation is different. In a bad marriage, in a struggling marriage, I'm busy accusing my husband or accusing my wife. Why did you say this? Why did you do this? How could you say this? I was at the Shabbos table at your mother and you embarrassed me. We had this guest. How do you dare say this? In a good marriage, I don't make statements. I ask a question with curiosity, with inquisitiveness. Why did you say this? Why? I wonder. I'm curious. I want to give you the benefit of the doubt. Instead of accusing you of being malicious, of being negative, I want to give you the benefit of the doubt on both sides. There's a similar notion. In a miserable marriage, I talk about you. In a good marriage, I talk about me. In a bad marriage, I talk about all the bad things you did and said. But in a good marriage, I don't talk about what you did and said. I talk about my own feelings. I give you the benefit of the doubt that you meant well. I just share with you how I felt about it. And you share with me how you felt about it. Instead of telling your husband, why did you do this? You share what it did for you, how you felt it, how you experienced it. So instead of me or him or her becoming defensive, saying, no, I didn't do that. You're not blaming them. I'm not blaming them. We're not blaming each other. Rather, we're sharing our own feelings, our own experiences, our own emotions. And therefore, the other person doesn't have to become defensive. I'm not blaming you. I'm just telling you how I feel about it. And because I'm telling you how I feel about it, you can understand, you can appreciate, you can explain yourself, you can apologize, you could say, I'm sorry, you could learn a lesson for next time. It makes such a powerful, powerful difference. For this, for all of this to happen, it's so important for a husband and a wife to create for each other in the home a safe space, a safe environment, a place where everyone could speak about their window, where everyone can be authentic, where everyone can be truthful about who they are and what they represent and what they want and what they dream about. I can even feel free to be like a 2-year-old child, to be immature, to be like a baby. We have to create in our homes a space where our husbands and our wives feel safe. This is a place of safety. I'm not going to be judged. I'm not going to be laughed on. I'm not going to be mocked. I'm not going to be held to a particular standard. I can just be who I am, and the other person may not understand it, but they're ready to be here for me. They're ready to embrace it. That's such a powerful, powerful tool. When that exists in a marriage, everybody could really feel comfortable being present, communicating with each other. All of this requires work. It requires discipline. It requires refinement, and it requires a lot of communication. It requires real trust. We should be able to really lean on each other and support each other and trust each other. No, my dearest friends, you may be wondering, these ideas seem like good ideas, but it can't work in my home. Rabbi Waiwa, you have to know my husband. If you would know my husband, you would know that this can't work in our home. And that's why it's so important, if at all possible, for there to be communication, ongoing communication. That's why I always suggest couples, especially now with the coronavirus, people learn to be home more. It's so important to take time every day or a few times a week, at least 3 or 4 times a week, and take a walk without the phone, without the distractions, and just talk and just schmooze and just reconnect. Just get to know each other. I believe this was one of the silver linings of the corona. I know the crisis and I know how badly it affected so many people. People lost their lives and people fell ill. But one of the silver linings of the crisis of the corona was that it challenged all of us to go a little deeper into ourselves, to retreat back to our own homes, to our own dining rooms and living rooms and bedrooms and kitchens, and try to figure out what's happening in our own marriage. To realize that home is the nest. The place to be is home. You know, till the corona, everybody was running away. Everybody was running everywhere, from malls to stadiums, to shopping centers, to universities, to libraries, to business centers, to offices, and of course, the whole tourism industry, traveling the world, having a great time. Home? Who wants to stay home? But with the corona, we were forced to discover that the only real joy you can discover is the joy that you discover inside yourselves, inside your heart, and inside your relationships, which means inside your home. And now, when the pandemic slowly, with God's help, is coming to an end, let's hope sooner than later, and we once again renew our activities and our schedules like in the past, don't forget that lesson that our deepest investment in life needs to be in that which is most precious, in building the future, in creating a tomorrow. And that is our homes, our marriages, our relationships, our families. Yes, careers are important and making money is great and having fun is wonderful. But real fulfillment and inner satisfaction and real creation, real accomplishment happens when we create powerful relationships that endure. All the research shows that that's the secret of the deepest joys and longevity and ability to overcome stress and illness. When you have strong and powerful relationships with people around you, first and foremost, with your spouse. But there's one important condition in all of this, and that is we have to be able to give each other the benefit of the doubt. There are couples that if somebody says something or does something, and you can interpret it negatively, or you can interpret it meritoriously. Which way do you go? So the Mishnah says, the ethics of the father says, you should judge every person favorably. That begins with your husband, begins with your wife. When they say something or do something, and you could look at it in two different ways, try to give it a positive spin. But why is it that some couples know how to do it and some couples don't know how to do it? Some couples give their spouses the benefit of the doubt. They assume that they meant well, and then they'll ask them in a curious melody, what happened? And other couples, no. They right away come to the conclusion, my husband was trying to hurt me. My wife was trying to hurt me. And then they will point fingers of accusation. And the difference is their general approach towards each other. When you conjure the image of your husband in your mind, do you feel a positive feeling or do you feel a negative feeling? If you're feeling a negative feeling, this marriage needs a lot of work. But if your general feeling is a positive feeling, then if you have a doubt, did he do the right thing or the wrong thing? You're going to attribute right motives to him. You're going to look at him in a meritorious, favorable, positive way. And in order to bring yourselves to that state, modern research has shown that you need positive comments versus negative comments in a ratio of 20-1. That means for every negative comment that you tell your husband, you need another 20 positive comments to balance it out. To make sure that the positivity is not balanced with the negativity, but it trumps, it defeats the negativity. So if there's one negative comment that the husband makes to the wife or the wife makes to the husband, you need another 20 positive comments. And positive comments could mean anything. Wow, that is such a beautiful tie. You really are matching today. Or thank you for how hard you work for the family. Or it's so appreciative. I am so appreciative to be married to you. Or you look so handsome. Or I really respect your character, your nobility, your values, your morality, your sense of humor. Whatever it is, a positive comment could be big or could be small, but it has to be truthful. Now, 20-1 is significant. But even if it's not 20-1, you can get away with less, but not less than 5-1. So if there's 4 positive comments and 1 negative comment, the negativity is going to trump this marriage. The negativity is going to be more powerful in this marriage. You want the positivity to be more powerful in this marriage. So minimum is 5-1. So if you made 1 negative comment, now you need 5 positive comments just to get it back. But much better to get 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and the best is 20-1. Now, some people look at it as a joke. Oh, come on, this is a joke. But it's not. It really works. It really works this way. Now I have to say a word, one important message. This all does not apply if there is serious trauma or personality disorder or somebody was raped or molested, because then none of this will work. If there's a wife or a husband suffering from serious trauma, they are locked up. They have no choice. They are stuck in their reptilian brain, in their amygdala. And they can't really make choices. They want to make choices, but they can't. They're overtaken by anger and frustration and despair and resignation and depression. They space out or they detach. They become passive aggressive, or they become crazy and impulsive or obsessive. They have absolutely no control because they're suffering from horrific trauma that paralyzes their brains and stumps their growth. Because if you learn about trauma, you know that the amygdala is sounding an alarm clock constantly. Fight or flight, even when it's not necessary. You're in this mode of danger, like a lion is coming into the house, screaming, running away from relationships because you're stuck in an old trauma that still lives in your body, and your body keeps the score. The same is true of this personality disorder. The same is true of this mental illness. If there's mental illness, it's not about speeches or nice sermons or nice books or good seminars or good midos. If there is mental illness, there is a serious illness. It's not the person's choice. The same is true if a person was molested or, God forbid, abused terribly. It creates deep traumas that deprive us from the choices we want to have a good marriage. We don't know how. Now, in these cases, there is help, but the prerequisite for help is that the person should take responsibility for their trauma, take responsibility for their molestation, take responsibility for their condition, and realize that I am responsible for my trauma, not my wife, not my husband. And I have to go find the healing and not use my spouse as a punching bag to deflect my own unresolved pain and tension and anxiety that I have inside myself. I hope you understand what I'm saying. If I don't do that, I'll always be blaming the other person, and there's very little hope here. So people can get help, even if they have been seriously scarred. But the condition is, I must take full responsibility for me and stop blaming my husband or stop blaming my wife for my pain, because it's not their fault. It's my own trauma that I never dealt with. It may be not my fault. So I could cry and I could sob and I can grieve and I can create space for that pain and compassion for that pain. But ultimately, I have to really take responsibility and say, it's my duty to be able to go and find the help that I need so that I could be in a good relationship. Everyone who's gathered here this evening, the power of the Jewish people has always been the power of strong families, the power of unity. Talmud says in Sota, page 17, Ish v'isha zachu shchina shruya b'neihem. When a husband and a wife merit, the Shekhinah, the divine presence, dwells among them. Zachu means merit, but zachu also means refined. When a wife and a husband refine themselves, the divine presence dwells among them. It requires refinement. I have to refine myself. I have to liberate myself from my traumas, from my insecurities, from my fears, from my trepidation, from my jealousy, from my hatred, from my animosity. We all have to refine ourselves. I have to be able to go into my inner purity, to my inner beauty, to my inner divinity and infinity. And then I can discover the Shekhinah that dwells among us. In the Rogatchover, Rabbi Yosef Rosen writes, what does it mean that Shekhinah dwells? He says, God is one. God is indivisible. When the Shekhinah dwells among them, it means that both of them become indivisible. Because if God is present in a home, there is oneness in the house, because that's what God is. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. The definition of God is oneness, infinity and oneness, and all inclusivity. So when the divine presence dwells in a home, what dwells in the house? A sense of oneness. There's a sense of indivisibility. Not because we have the same personality, but because we have a very powerful trust for each other. Because we respect the institution of marriage. We don't only respect each other, we also respect the institution of marriage. And that institution of marriage, we both respect. It's a value that we both have. And that creates an indivisible connection and relationship that can withstand and weather every storm. So precious women, girls who have gathered here this evening, I bless you and all of us, that we should have the courage and the resilience and the fortitude and the faith and the wisdom and the humility and the perspective to be able to create meaningful, inspiring, beautiful marriages in our homes. Marriages that are filled with inner joy, with inner purpose, with inner meaning, with inner trust. They fill a home with joy. They fill the children's lives with confidence, with a certain inner fulfillment that carries them for generations, just like we were carried by the generations that came before us. And it's this power of unity, this powerful homes that we create among the people that enriches our nation with the profoundest blessings of light and holiness and oneness and sacredness. Thank you very much. Could you repeat the question? And also, I see the chat here. If anybody wants, they could put their question into chat. Oh, they don't have the chat. Okay. Sorry. Repeat it again. I didn't understand. What advice I can give? Advice that I would give to singles. Okay. That's a great question. So I'll say a few fast points. The first thing I'm going to say is that I just finished a 3-week series for singles about dating. One was for parents, one was for young men, and one was for young women. If you go to the website theyeshiva.net and you search dating, you will see the three lecture series, the three lectures in a series about dating for women, for young women, for young men, and for parents. That's theyeshiva.net, theyeshiva.net. That's where you have also my other classes. But just to give you a few fast points, I'll say, number one, it's important when you're dating somebody, it's extremely important to make sure that you share similar values, that you really feel passionate about the same values, that you're ready to fight for the same values. It's also important to make sure that the person you want to build a life with is a mensch. You know what a mensch is? He has midot tovot, flexible, compromising, kind, not egotistical and narcissistic and impossible and stubborn. Very important. You want to make sure that there's a person who's sensitive and compassionate. Because even when we date, we don't really get to know the other person. It takes many years to get to know your spouse. But during dating, you want to know enough to be able to tell yourself, this is the person I would like to go with on a journey of self-discovery and a journey of discovery of them and discovery of me. In other words, I don't know you yet, but I know enough that I would like to go on the hike, on this 90-year hike, God willing, together with you. That's what I want to know. So it's important to make sure that the person has those qualities, those emotional and human qualities that will allow you to navigate life and all of its challenges and the arguments and the disputations in a respectful and dignified way. That's one important piece of advice I would give you. Another important piece of advice I would give you is it's extremely important when you meet people to have people that you can talk to honestly and openly, people you trust. Don't feel the pressure to make the whole decision yourself. People that you could really get feedback from. And you don't have to be pressured to finish it fast. If you're not sure, take time, take more time. It's important. If there's red flags, don't ignore them. Sometimes during dates, people ignore things and later they become major problems. Don't ignore them. Bring them up to somebody who's competent, a therapist, professional, somebody who really understands. Maybe they'll say, yeah, it's not a big deal, but maybe they're going to say, we have to look into this. So these are some of the points I would be cautious about. What advice would I give to an engaged couple before marriage? Yeah, I would advise an engaged couple before marriage. First of all, I'll say I have a few lectures that I gave about a good marriage and a miserable marriage. Again, you can go to theyeshiva.net and put in marriage, and you'll see some of the lectures between a good marriage and a miserable marriage. So that's number one. I would advise listen to it together. There's a lecture by myself. There's a lecture by a therapist. They're named Mr. Lamb. Very good lectures. So I would listen to it, maybe even together or separate. That's number one. Number two, a few general pieces of advice that come to mind that I can give you is it's extremely important to communicate. You know, to communicate. This is the time that you really want to get to know each other. Um, and it's important to get to learn about each other in an open way, to really understand who the other person is, to make room for the other person, and to remember that these are the times when you create a foundation for either a blessed life together, or God forbid, for a cursed life together. So take it seriously. It's important time. It's important to maintain the boundaries of Jewish law. As the Lubavitcher Rebbe once told somebody, those who are close when they have to be distant become distant when they have to be close. So it's important to maintain the boundaries according to Jewish law before your marriage. Another very important thing is to have the proper preparations for marriage. So it's important to have a good teacher for the bride and the groom. A good teacher, somebody who understands you, somebody who's sensitive to who you are in your background, to give you a good tutorials, preparations for marriage in terms of the laws of mikvah and the laws of intimacy, and not just the laws, but also the spirit. And it has to be somebody good, somebody you're comfortable with, somebody who understands who you are and who your groom is to be able to guide you in the right way. Another important thing is to be able to prepare yourself for the wedding, not just by getting furniture and a gown, but also through spiritual preparations. It's important to pray and to meditate and to study Torah so that you build your home on powerful, time tested values that have kept us alive for thousands of years and will keep us here for eternity. And besides that, enjoy life. I didn't understand the question. I guess it's two separate questions. Okay, I got mixed up. So the answer to the first question is, um, I think that you're ready to get married when you are ready to take responsibility for yourself, and that's number one. And number two, you have to make sure that you're in an emotionally healthy and stable place. So it's good to have somebody in your life. If you have a doubt, for example, let's say you're suffering from a lot. I know a girl suffering from a lot of anxiety, and her parents told me that she's not ready for marriage. It's going to be a disaster. She needs to work on herself a few years. So if you're suffering from things that are going to paralyze your marriage and it's just going to create a mess, then don't jump into it. Take care of yourself. But it's important not to make these decisions yourself. Maybe discuss it with your mother or father if you have a good relationship with them, or with an older sibling, or with a therapist, or with a coach, or with a psychologist. Whatever the person is, you want to get a person who knows you, who you trust, who gets it, and who's here for you. So if you have a doubt that maybe you're not ready because there's things bothering you, get feedback. Yeah, maybe you're not. Maybe you need to work on yourself. Maybe you have to go through a journey in order for you to be ready. But if that's not an issue, then the most important thing is to say, I'm ready to take responsibility. Ready to take responsibility for opening up this very serious chapter in my life where I'm ready to build a life with another person and completely dedicate myself to that person and have that person dedicate themselves to me. And together we can create a home. So it's a very serious and mature decision. It's not a game. In terms of hizuk to singles that you ask for, I think the most important thing to remember is, although we love marriage and we cherish marriage and we bless each and every young Jewish man and a woman to find their soulmate and to get married, but we have to remember that the time pre-marriage is not wasted time. It's not like you're not a person, you're just a loser until you get married. You're just a statistic and a number. That's not fair. And if people come to that conclusion, then you should not fall prey to it. Don't allow them to make you feel that way. Don't allow this stigma to define you. And even if it's hard, God runs the world. We have to do what we have to do according to natural circumstances to pursue our shidduch. But till you find your soulmate, live a great life. Pursue projects, pursue a career, grow, learn, make a difference, build relationships, become a powerhouse, develop yourself, maximize your potential. It's not a mistake. For whatever reason, God's plan for you is to take you on this journey until you find your soulmate. This is not wasted time. This is not, stupid time. I have nothing to do. I'm a loser. No, don't let that impression take root in your mind. You have to be confident that you're a human being who has infinite dignity. You're trying what you can do. Don't surrender to despair and anger and resignation. Be courageous, be spirited, be positive. But don't stop living until you find your groom. That's not fair. You live and you live a great life and you live a beautiful life and you live an amazing life. And that itself will put you in the mind space that will open you up to relationships in a far more profound and positive way. Thank you. May God bless all of you with great marriages, beautiful homes, great families, those who need a shidduch in the right time to find it. But remember, live till then. Don't be paralyzed till then. And may all of us experience only peace and blessings in our homes and families, and ultimately peace and blessings in Israel, and for all of our brothers and sisters, and for the whole world. And may we experience the ultimate redemption, the Geula Shlema. It's high time for the complete redemption. B'mheira b'yameinu, amen. Thank you. Thank you.